Just, I want to check my sound really quick. I got a little bit of kind of comfort music running in the back, so I kind of want to see how it's coming out here. So give me one sec. And you guys are just getting here anyway, so I got plenty of time, right? But I do have a good, well thought out myth lab for you guys today. Okay, I think I'm going to space it out right there. I think that's probably a good point. Okay, so I'm going to get right into the myth lab today. And today I got a really good one, right? This one I actually put a lot of, what I mean, this one actually, this one I put a lot of time into because I wanted to make sure I had a really good topic for you guys today. And these are three goddesses, man, that I really, this was some good work here on my part. Let's be honest here, right? And you see who I've got here. If you don't recognize these goddesses, on the far here, we've got uh, Erzulie Dantò, right? Who I just actually did a profile on her. This is a fascinating figure that comes from, that Caribbean voodoo tradition, like from West Africa. But it's been kind of synchronized more thoroughly at this point, right? And then of course in the middle, in the purple there, we got Oya, right? And Oya is straight up from Yoruba belief systems. I'm sure she's been incorporated in the Western world as well in some way. And then we have Izrazuli. Now, excuse me. Then we have Anat. Now, Anat, I think, is the oldest one. Man, I better be careful how I say that, man, because these are three goddesses about fury, and you better watch your mouth, right? So I'm going to be a little more cautious with that. We've talked about her longer, I think, than the other one. So she's a little bit more documented as a deity. But the reason I wanted to talk about each one of these is that they kind of represent this protective mother spirit. And not just the protective mother spirit. These are the it's going to be a real problem type of scenario with these three ladies, right? This is the F around and find out. This, if I had to name all three of them together, right? If they were a group, if they were a band, I would call this band F around and find out. I mean, that would be as easy as it gets. So I wanted to kind of talk to you about, first of all, why. Like, they're the fierce mother archetype across cultures, right? Erzulie Dantò, this is the scarred revolutionary mother. So she's protected, she's associated with protection, particularly of like the colonized women. She's fire spirit, she's protective, she's very jealous at times, but she's also associated with uprising, right? Like, you can see her, man. She's rolling with a machete right in hand. So clearly she didn't come for games, and she's not playing around with me or you or anybody else for that matter, right? That's how she's coming about it, right? She's trauma memory embodied in divinity. So she's all about the Middle Passage and the colonial state and the oppression. And she also, like, I'm protective of children. I'm protective of women, particularly single women, and like in the whole love romance, like mothers to be. She's with the blade nearby. This is no problems, right? Dealing with a situation. This is loyalty demanding. Like, that's what she's all about. You're going to give me this loyalty, or you better step aside. You better, in fact, you should have never stepped over here if you weren't willing to give your loyalty. So that's something that is central to this figure, and we need to understand her first. And like I said, like, you see the beauty, right? But she's got the scars, and the scars in this regard are more like, I've been through some stuff, right? And she has. That's what she represents. Now, culturally, like in the infusion with a little bit of Catholicism, she also gets associated with the Madonna. So she's also that Black Madonna figure. And you can see up there, as she's associated with the child, most of the time she's shown with a child in her arms. So that's who she is, like 100% of the time. And just a powerful figure. So this is a figure that burns, right? Now, the second one, and we're going to talk about their timelines. That's really what I want to get to, is who they are and how their timelines all kind of flow together. That's the fascinating part of, discussing the mythology, right? So now we get to Oya. And here's the thing. Oya is Storm, right? She's also very, like, she's all about chains. So she governs wind, she governs lightning, she governs sudden transformations. She protects cemeteries, and she's also she like gets stuff right. So when tension gets too high, she explodes, and she's always very protective of the tribe. Like that's why she was so venerated in Yoruba belief systems. So whereas Danto burns everything down, Oya tears it down in a different way. Oya's power is motion. She doesn't tolerate stagnation, and she destroys what needs to end. Period. Point blank. She will move on. Like the winds take out the rot. The winds remove all the stagnant stuff, culturally, politically, structurally, whatever lead that you want to put on the back end of that. That's what wind does. Wind doesn't care, right? So wind gets rid of the stuff that wasn't going to survive. The old buildings go first, right? That stimulates the newer construction. That's how a lot of times cities get rebuilt, is after some catastrophe, some natural disaster, right? So they're both connected in these two. They're both connected in upheaval. They're both triggered by imbalance, right? Some typically oppressional balances, and they're not romantic archetypes. This is not about romance here, right? If you're looking at them, hey, you got to make your own decisions in life. But I'm telling you right now, this is not about romance for either one of these guys, right? Mad God. So, protective goddesses is the topic, right? I'm just dropping a comment in the stream, right? So we know both of these deities. The differences between these two, and we're going to talk about Anat, because she, like I said, her history is more well documented. Anat protects through fire because she's associated. So what we have, this is actually great here because we have an Iowa, right? Danta is in Iowa versus Oya being in Orisha. So spiritually, kind of similar, right? If you're an outsider, spiritually they both represent forces. Now, specifically about Danta, is that she represents the fire part. Like in their belief system, they've got the two Iowa, and one is Petro, and I forget what the other one is. But Petro is the fire side. That's the side you don't want a problem with. So she represents fire, whereas Oya's role, again, she's more wind, storm. So that's where her lane is. Forces, obviously, but a little bit different. So how they go about getting their business done is gonna differentiate the two of them, right? How they go about business. Not that they're not gonna come knock your block off if you start tripping, but just in how they would go knock your. One would burn you to pieces and cut your head off. The other one would probably shoot you with lightning or wind. So that's how they come about it. Okay. Now, Anat is in this mold with them as well, right? Older destiny, right, coming along at an earlier time, but she is a warrior who literally wades in blood. So she's the ancient Levantian war energy, and she is brutal. So she's associated more with the Baal cycle. And we talked about Baal, the Baal being a title and all these various, communities. So she's a part of that. And what she does, now she's more tribal. Or, and I don't know if I'd say more. Yeah, she's definitely more tribal. I think more tribal, or the most tribal representation out of all three of them here. And she's brutal. And I mean brutality at a level that, yeah, it doesn't really make no sense. Like, I understand where you're coming from, but you didn't really have to do all that, right? That's kind of where Anat is, right? She slaughters enemies. And she's known for wading in blood up to her knees. That's a lot of blood, guys. That is a whole lot of blood. She destroys without hesitation to defend her people. Now, one of the things that I talked about is with especially Danta is, if you touch that baby that she's carrying, dude, it's a massacre. It's going down, right? She will do anything, right? So they both have that extremism in their protection. Back to Annette. She is also fiercely loyal. She is not maternal in the soft sense of being maternal, right? That's not what you're going to get out of it. You're not going to say, Mommy, I fell, and expect any sympathy out of her. If you say, Mommy, I fell, she's probably going to be like, good. That'll create a scab and it makes you tougher. But she's completely protective in the tribal sense. So she does not negotiate disrespect. She simply annihilates it. Now, these things are all kind of closely aligned, especially with Danto's, her thing, because her energy is like, betray me once, you find out what'll happen, right? but they clearly demand loyalty. That's the highest thing, is loyalty. Punish betrayal. They stand as defenders of their people. They refuse submissive femininity. That is not going on. I'm not bowing down to you. If you thought that was going to happen, well, you thought wrong. Okay. So Anat is more tribal war rage, where Dantò is more diaspora survival rage. So their power is on different kind of planes, right? But all necessary, especially if you were the people that they were defending. You're like, yeah, yeah, we need her around. We want you around all the time, okay? Now, the more interesting is we're going to see when we get into the temporal part, and we start talking about the timeline, how much gap is between this archetype of these protector women, and they're already separated by regions. I don't know if there's not a lot of cultural crossover. Obviously, you have the Caribbean, right, which is Voodoo or Vodou, and the Yoruba, who are going to share, right? They share some belief systems coming over. But we're talking about ancient Canaan with Anat, which is why I wanted her in there, because we're seeing a completely different time period, a completely different culture, and yet we're seeing the same type of archetype repeated. And that's kind of what we're all about, right? Like these are the archetypes that we're seeing, and how culturally we keep kind of coming up with the same ideas, right? So these are the feminine that they protect through violence. This is not about chaos. It's not about cruelty. It's about protection. It's about boundary reinforcement. It's about refusal to be erased. And this comes about from individual mythologies and then this reoccurring theme. And so this is kind of why I wanted to talk about these three deities. And I've worked out some timelines, and I think it's going to be an effective conversation. But I wanted to kind of explain who they were first, why we were talking about them. Now I can get into the fun part, right? And I'm going to go through this timeline, and I'm going to tell you guys, I put some time in on this one, right? I put some time in on the timeline, so I give you guys a good lab today. Okay, so let's get right into it. And we're going to go pretty far back and see who we start talking about first and how that matters in how they come out. So let's get to the beginning here, okay?
This matters because these early cultic foundations would later give rise to this matters because these early cultic foundations would later give rise to the fully developed figure of Anat. In 1800 BCE.
Okay, so this is far back. I think it started at 2000 BC. We're seeing the first mentions of Anat herself. At this point, she's being referenced in Egypt, which I would call it Kemet, right? But you can read the dialogue here. So they're already kind of talking about her. And I remember her in Kemetic mythology, and she becomes, I believe, one of the wives of Set. Like there's some deal that Set gets, like when Set has to give up the throne. I think this is an interesting part. When Set, we know about Set fighting against Heru for the throne after he murders Asar. Some people say that wasn't even a murder, and Asar had it coming. Maybe, maybe. But at any point, when they make the deal, he gets this Canaanite wife. He gets two wives. I want to say it was Anat, and is it like Astarte? It's something like that. And I'll pick that up for a further discussion so we can talk about it. But at this point, you can see she starts off in Canaan, but pretty quickly, this is 200 years later, so 1800 BCE, they're already talking about her in Kemet. So this is how she gets introduced into Kemetic culture. And I always heard her as one of the wives that was given to Set.
Egypt referencing Canaan, Anat appears in Egyptian execration texts. This matters because it provides one of the earliest written attestations of her name outside her homeland. In 1400 BCE, in Ugarit in modern-day Syria, tablets were composed that would later be identified as the Bull cycle. This matters because these texts preserve the primary mythological record of Anat as a warrior and defender of Bull. In 1300 BCE, in Ugarit and surrounding Levantine cities, cultic objects and inscriptions referencing Anat were in circulation.
I mean, that's big because that Ugaritic text is really the foundation for most of the early mythology. Like even before we got into Kemetic belief systems or Egyptian, we were hearing all about that, about Canaan and Mesopotamia and Uruk. So these are some of the earliest like writings, inscriptions. At least they were the first found in that ancient region. And again, this is all Fertile Crescent, right?
This matters because because archaeological evidence confirms her active worship during the Late Bronze Age. In 1200 BCE, across the eastern Mediterranean, the Bronze Age collapse disrupted Canaanite city-states, including Ugarit. This matters because the fall of these cities altered the transmission and survival of Anat's cult traditions. In 1000 BCE, in the Levant and Phoenician regions, Anat's identity was absorbed into evolving regional goddess traditions.
Hmm.
This matters because her worship adapted under shifting political and cultural conditions.
I don't know who she became, though. I don't know of any names that Anat is associated with. I guess we'll find out.
In 800 BCE, in Elephantine in southern Egypt, inscriptions referencing Anat Yahu appeared within a Jewish military colony.
I mean, and it's funny. A lot of those earlier cultural texts, a lot of those deities, especially around Sumer, Mesopotamia, they were working their ways into the Jewish text. So I'm not surprised by this. That actually makes a lot of sense.
This matters because it shows the continued adaptation and syncretism of Anat within new cultural contexts. In 1500 CE, in West Africa across Yorubaland, structured Orisha cosmology was firmly established.
So this is the first. So we see, we're talking not a huge gap. 500 years basically from when we first hear about Anat until the time that we first get the shapings of the Orisha cosmology that would produce Oya. So it's not a huge period of time necessarily in this timeline. But let's think about it. For both these goddesses, for Anat, at this point we can say over 4,000 years we've been talking about her. For Oya, we can say roughly 3,500 years. That's a long time to still be kind of talked about and discussed like we're doing right now.
This matters because within this developing religious system, Oya emerged as a storm, wind, and ancestral gatekeeping deity. In 1200 CE, in the Oyo Empire of Yorubaland, the cult of Shango rose in prominence.
Well, again, because she's always, I know it's probably going to say this, she's always closely associated with Shango. Now, the reason I didn't lead with any Shango, because I think it's always kind of disrespectful for a feminine deity to talk about who her consort was, who the guy she was associated with. But in this point, he's associated with the storms, her association with lightning, and she often would will, because remember, Shango also was the weapons maker. He made a lot of weapons, and she wielded a lot of those weapons, right? So not only was she able to, that was kind of the biggest thing. None of the other Orishas could wield those weapons. That's how powerful. And I'm not saying all of them, but most of them, they were structured for Shango's strength. She had the strength to handle those weapons as well. And I think there were other, like a significant amount of weapons that he made for her specifically, right? So she had her own thing going on.
Oya became closely associated with lightning and royal power. This matters because it strengthened her identity as a force of sudden transformation and political energy. In the 1500s CE, during the transatlantic slave trade from West Africa to the Caribbean and Brazil, Yoruba religious systems were carried into the Americas.
Very true.
This matters because Oya's worship expanded beyond Africa into diaspora traditions.
And that'll be important, right? So she's kind of the genesis. So before it gets into the Caribbean, she's there before Dantò, right? Now, it's interesting because Dantò probably comes over as a different spirit and gets kind of reabsorbed and renamed. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. But we'll see how long it takes for her to actually show up in the timeline as well.
Such as Santeria and Candomblé. In the 1700s CE, in Cuba, Brazil, and the Caribbean, Oya was integrated into syncretic Afro-Atlantic religious systems.
Yeah.
This matters because her identity evolved while maintaining core associations with storm, change, and ancestral thresholds.
Like that's what I was talking about. Is like they were able, especially for the areas that were colonized by the Spanish, and they were really embedding Catholicism. Catholicism through their saints was easy to convert for all types of things, like Orishas, for instance, which a lot of them did, and the Iowa who came out of it, who I kind of think are very similar.
In 1492 CE, in Hispaniola in the Caribbean, European colonization began. This matters because it initiated the conditions that would eventually produce Haitian Vodou.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1500s CE, in Saint-Domingue, enslaved Africans brought West and Central African spiritual systems to the colony. This matters because these traditions fused under colonial Haitian Vodou. In the 1700s CE, in Saint Domingue, the petrocurrent emerged within Vodou practice.
And that's an important thing. That's what I talked about. That's what I was talking about was that petro current, right? Because that's the fire. The other side of it is the cool. Those are the Iwe who would be like the calm rivers, right? The water spirits, right? Water's calm. She ain't that. She's hot. She's flamed up, right? You can see it, and she has that energy. And I'm not saying she's about revenge, retribution, and get back. But if you cross her, you should expect revenge, retribution, and get back.
This matters because petrospirits embodied reactive, fiery energies associated with resistance under oppression, including the spirit later identified as Erzulie Dantò.
See, yeah, and this is her early foundations in the conversation. So she's like seven. So this is some time period passing that we've gone through here. We've probably gone through over like 1,300 years of history, right? In just that flash of these three goddesses here.
In August of 1791, in northern Saint Domingue, the Boys Caiman ceremony took place. This matters because it symbolically marked the spiritual ignition of the Haitian Revolution.
Now, obviously, this is an important time because the Haitian Revolution has always been riddled with the idea of the spirits being involved, right? They talked about that heavily, that they were invoking, and that's where, Danta gets one of the dominant aspects of her personality and her mythology is born through that cultural uprising, through that throwing off of oppression.
And is often associated with the rise of petro-energies. On January 1st, 1804, in Haiti, independence was declared.
Shout out to Haiti. Congratulations on that.
The first Black Republic, and revolutionary spirit traditions became embedded in national identity. In the
Haiti is still dealing with the fallout of that. Remember, this is 1800. The West is still isolating Haiti because of that, right? This is why a lot of the problems that Haiti has, because they've been occupied. They still have the French money. U.S. occupied them for a while. So big shout out to you, Haiti, though. Much love.
1800s, in Haiti under Catholic colonial influence, Erzulie Dantò became associated with the Black Madonna of Czestochowa. This matters.
Now that's a huge deal. That association with the Black Madonna, and that really helps to expand the Black Madonna role. And you can see how these deities get hidden, right? We're calling it this name. We're using the name, whatever name you wanted to give her, but she represents this deity here for us.
The syncretism allowed Vodou spirits to survive under imposed religious systems.
That's what I was saying specifically about Catholicism. It allowed those spirits to continue. Whereas, in North America, a different type. It wasn't obviously Catholicism, although they had, a lot of influence there. We can see by all the cities they name. But once you start getting away from all that and getting deeper into the South, the religious context and the freedom and tolerance vastly differs. So you see a little bit in the South, like throughout Louisiana, particularly, you see more of the Isra, Dante, and maybe more Oya. But when you spread out that, it kind of diminishes pretty quickly.
In 1860, in Haiti, the Concordat between Haiti and the Vatican formalized Catholic influence. This matters because Vodou practices continued in parallel, reinforcing encoded devotion to war such as that.
So they are keeping, so big shout out to those people. They kept their belief systems going. They didn't give it up, right? They took on a lot of Catholicism, but they did not give up the core when they, who they were personally venerating in their own homes. And that's culturally a huge win right there.
In 1915, in Haiti, the United States occupation began.
Yeah, I talked
This
about that,
matters
yeah.
Because Vodou was heavily stigmatized in Western narratives during this period.
Now, that's an interesting thing because, I hadn't thought about that angle, but I'm going to pay attention to it and look at what the U.S. film market was doing around that time, because we got a lot of movies that really trashed voodoo belief systems. Like, we were taught that voodoo was about, making zombies out of people, like they would enslave you. Man, I remember watching, I think it was like The Serpent and the Rainbow, and I'm telling you, it was a terrifying movie for me. That was absolutely terrifying. And I watch scary movies all the time. It was absolutely terrifying looking at their belief systems. And then even, what's the Steven Seagal movie where he fights the Jamaicans? They were initially going to call it Screwface. I can't remember which one, but Keith David's in it, and it's a great movie. And even then, we see the drug dealers association with voodoo and how we thought he was all magical. And if you watch What's the Predator with Danny Glover, when he goes and meets the Jamaican kind of drug lord, he thought his spirituality was going to protect him from the predator, right? It was This is crazy, but they have always been so strong in that reinforcing not only their spirituality, but how they were actually moving in the world. And that was one of the biggest catalysts for gaining their freedom. So you got to give it props.
In 1959, in Cuba, the revolution altered the practice of Afro-Cuban religions, including Oya devotion. This matters because Orisha traditions adapted under changing political systems.
They have been able to filter out into the West in ways I don't think people even thought. And they're very prevalent now, and we're seeing more and more, especially like look at like black comic book makers right now here in the West. A lot You'll see a lot of Shango, you'll see a lot of Oya. Like they're really drawn on that mythology, which makes sense. Like, a lot of Marvel stuff was early on was drawn off of Greek mythology, which we all know very well, and Norse mythology. That's why we get Thor. So we get Thor, we get Sif, we get Hercules from the Greek side. So they're just drawing on other mythologies, right? Other belief systems.
In 1987, in Haiti, the constitution recognized freedom of religion. This matters because Vodou gained formal protection within the nation. In 2003, in Haiti, Vodou was officially recognized as a religion. This matters because spirits.
And again, you see how like it's formalized as a religion, but here in the West, like growing up here in the West, or growing up here in the U.S., I should say, my early experiences with hearing about voodoo was always negative, despite the fact that my grandmother's Creole, right? You know what I'm saying? And even she had completely give like I don't know. She never mentioned to me anything about anything that came out of voodoo. Like her ancestors, they come from New Orleans. Like she's 100% that. But I never heard her talk about it. She was very devout Christian. So I don't know if those are some practices that she kept. I remember I was fortunate enough to meet my grandmother's grandmother, and I know that she had. I remember her having some particular behaviors or beliefs or things that she would say, which kind of always made me say, "What is this lady talking about?" Because she was talking about her spirituality, and a lot of it went beyond what we had been introduced, just in church at that period of time, like a Christian church.
Such as Erzulie Dantò, were formally acknowledged within the national religious landscape.
So you see now for Erzulie Dantò, she's formalized now. This is not that. This is 20, would say 2013. So from 1500 to 2013, so she survived, what is that, roughly 700 years, right? Or 500, 600 years, something like that. But now she's formalized in the modern time. So she's stronger now than even she was previously. And that's a lot considering all the outside cultural influence.
In the early 21st century, across global diaspora communities, devotion to Oya and Erzulie Dantò expanded beyond their original regions.
Yeah, absolutely.
This matters because both figures increasingly function as archetypes of transformation, resistance, and protective feminine power in global discourse.
So I feel like that was when we're talking about these three goddesses, we see a long period of history for this archetype. We're talking from the earliest one being at 2000 BCE, and both Oya and Danta getting props even right now. So, these deities, again, have come a long way in terms of how we look at them, or not really how they look at them, but their influences. I mean, we watch Anat go from the Levant to filtering out through Jewish texts to being associated with Egyptian or Kemetic belief systems. And we see Oya coming directly from the western part of Africa and being embedded. We see a more direct line. With Danta, Ezra Danta, we see her developing roots in Africa, and then she really gains her far formal structure in the Caribbean, in the West, particularly in Haiti, and then to be formalized, that's how hard they're standing behind her right now. So three different goddess archetypes from three different communities. And, honestly, the African and the Caribbean, the West African particularly in the Caribbean, are a little tighter than what I thought when I sat down and kind of thought it out. So I probably would have gone for another culture and replaced one of them because I feel like they're kind of represent the same. But we do get to see that this archetype, this female protective archetype, has existed for a long period of time. It has been consistent, it has been strong, and they haven't really changed a lot in their representations. Some deities change, like we talked about the whole Baal system and how they got reclassified as demons. All these goddesses have still kept their form and their primary functions over this incredibly long period of time. So again, I have the chat open. You guys could definitely, right? You guys could definitely get in, but I'll be back maybe later today. I might do another myth lab. I don't know, but probably I can guarantee you guys tomorrow I'll be back about this time. Thank you for stopping in. As always, if you're first time in, hit the like and subscribe. Go check out the channel. The channel. I've already got some information at least on Danta is already up there. I've done some profiles on Oya, and I'm working on a new one right now. And I'll have a newer, updated profile on Anat coming out maybe in a couple of days or so. So the information will be there. The timeline that I use for referencing my information, that's also going to be my other website, which is Myth Archives. So you guys can definitely check that out. So again, I'm going to log off here, but I'll be back. As always, I appreciate your support, and we'll talk more gods later.